Hello, and welcome to Legally Speaking, a production of the Macomb County Bar Foundation and Lakeshore Legal Aid. During this unprecedented time, many Michigan residents have lost their jobs or income. Unfortunately, the federal unemployment subsidy ended in late July, leaving many Michiganders without an economic safety net. In addition, Governor Whitmer's eviction moratorium ended on July 15th. Now, experts fear a wave of evictions. Some good news is that Michigan has created a statewide eviction diversion program. This program, funded with $60 million in coronavirus relief funds, allows housing agencies, legal aid programs, and courts to work together to help tenants pay back rent and stay in their homes. Today on Legally Speaking, we'll talk about the creation of Michigan's eviction diversion programs and the resources available for tenants. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legally Speaking. I'm Ashley Lowe, Chief Executive Officer of Lakeshore Legal Aid, a nonprofit law firm that provides free civil legal services to low-income people, seniors, and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault throughout Michigan. Today we're talking about Michigan's Eviction Diversion Program, a statewide effort to provide funds for rent to keep tenants in their homes during the pandemic. We're joined by three experts in this field. First, Kellie Rose, the Chief Housing Officer at Michigan State Housing Development Authority. Kellie has been with MSHDA for 7 years, and she oversees the asset management and rental assistance and homeless solutions divisions that address the needs of the public in accessing quality housing. She and her team worked with community partners to find solutions to address housing insecurity, financial barriers, and homelessness. Kellie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
We're also joined by Kellie Maki Foster. She's the Staff Development Director at Lakeshore Legal Aid, and she's leading Lakeshore's efforts to implement the Eviction Diversion Program in the Detroit metro region. She's a longtime legal aid attorney with years of experience in housing prevention work, including establishing eviction diversion programs. Kellie, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Ashley.
And finally, I'd like to welcome Chief Judge McConico. He's the Chief Judge of the 36th District Court in Detroit. Chief Judge McConico is a former state legislator and a city attorney in Highland Park, and he now runs the busiest court in Michigan. He's been working closely with local legal aid providers and rental assistance agencies to create a robust eviction diversion program in Detroit. Chief Judge McConico, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'd like to start our discussion at the statewide level. So Kellie Rose, can you talk about the role of MSHDA generally? When it's not a pandemic, what does MSHDA do?
Well, MSHDA works to provide affordable housing across the state through a number of different programs. So really through single-family home lending, the development of multifamily affordable housing, and distributing rental assistance across the state. So we're really working to try to meet the housing needs of low and moderate income people.
Great, thanks. And I know you're working really hard right now to help Michiganders during the pandemic. What's that looking like? What's happening?
Yeah, so right now we're rolling out the eviction diversion program statewide. We have $60 million of funds that was appropriated from the state legislature, and Governor Whitmer signed Senate Bill 690 into action on July 1st. So we have $60 million in total, $50 million for rental assistance, and then $10 million split between legal aid services, case management services for the agencies running the program, and $2 million of administrative fees. So we're really just working to try to make sure that this program gets launched quickly because we know some evictions are already, starting to take place again, so that we have these programs in place to help people that are going through the process.
Thanks. And so that's a lot of money. How is it distributed throughout the state?
Sure. So we used the landlord tenant filing data primarily from 2018 to look at where is the predominance of evictions happening in the state. And really, as you go further south and east within the state, that's where sort of the center of mass of evictions are happening. So the bulk of the funds are in Southeast Michigan. So far, we've allocated 40 million of the 50 million, keeping 10 in reserve to allocate once programs kind of get into operation, so that we can strategically deploy that last 10 million to where the most amount of evictions are happening.
Great, and those funds that are available, who's eligible to receive those funds?
Sure. So renters that are below the area median income are eligible for the program. So for an example of that, in Wayne County, a family of 4 that makes less than $78,500 is eligible for the program. And we do have 3 tiers of income brackets within the program, to where we're trying to reserve we will be reserving at least half of the funds for the lowest income families, so those below 50% of area median income. So kind of using that same example of a Wayne County family of 4, that being below $39,000 of, because we know, families with lower incomes, are more vulnerable to evictions, and will need that assistance in greater amounts. So tenants below the area median income are eligible.
Okay. And we've been talking about tenants and the needs for their background and what they would receive, but how does this program help landlords?
Well, this program works to help landlords by getting payments to them much quicker than what they would typically get if they went through the standard eviction process and were trying to collect from a tenant with a money judgment. So in this program, there is a small landlord forgiveness amount that ends up being between 7 to 10% of the back rent owed. But really, we're working to try to, very quickly work with the tenant and the landlord to get through the application process, make sure the tenant's eligible, and then quickly get the funds dispersed to the landlord. Because even getting, 90% of that back rent due, but getting it within a couple of weeks is usually a much better proposition than, trying to go after the entire amount, but maybe never getting that, or maybe it taking months and months to collect those funds. So we really think that, the speed of this program of getting the rental assistance to landlords is really going to be a big advantage. And we know that many landlords, they're really hurting right now. Most landlords are not large corporations with, millions of dollars in the bank. Many of them are mom and pop landlords that have a handful of rental units, and not having the rent paid during this time has really caused them financial hardship of not being able to make their mortgage payments. So we really think that this is a win-win for both the renter and the landlord.
Great. How is MSHDA working to get the word out about these funds?
Well, we've been doing lots of media related to this. And starting next week, we're doing Facebook buys. We have videos created to drive people to our website. So it's michigan.gov/EDP, where people can go to find out more about the program, and really importantly, find out their local service agency in their area that's administering the program, because they really need to start there. We also have connections there for how they can get legal services, because really they could kind of start at either end of first contacting legal aid, which they're partnering in the field with their local housing agency, or starting with that housing assessment and resource agency to get the process started.
Got it. So really kind of a no wrong door approach, that no matter how tenants are coming in, they can start getting assistance.
Definitely. Yeah, we know that legal services is welcome to take those, those first contacts as well. And so are HARAs, because they'll both be working on the case together.
Great. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to shift and talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of these programs. Kellie Maki Foster, you're the proverbial boots on the ground here. Can you give us some context? How does the eviction process generally work when we're not in the eviction diversion world?
Sure. So the eviction process goes really fast. It's unlike any other lawsuit. It is called under summary proceedings is what it's called. And so the first step before a landlord can evict a tenant is they have to serve notice. And so generally speaking, if it's a non-payment of rent case, that's 7-day notice. If it's a termination of tenancy, it's 30 days. And then during that notice time period, the tenant can cure, so they could pay, they could move, they could correct whatever issue that there might be. But if the tenant hasn't, the landlord can file a summons and complaint in the district court. As I mentioned, it's really fast, and so a hearing can be about within 10 days of when the complaint was filed. It's also a little different in terms of other lawsuits where a tenant doesn't have to file an answer. They can raise any defenses or claims that they have at the first hearing. And at the first hearing, if a tenant is unrepresented, they can request an adjournment to seek a lawyer. Right now, under COVID times, the first hearing is actually a pretrial with the intention of trying to reach settlement agreements so that tenants and landlords have time to work through the program that Kelly Rose was just talking about. But this program is voluntary. And so we can't force landlords to participate in the program if they don't want to. But if they don't want to, there's still lots of things that legal aid can do. Having a lawyer in the process is so important. Landlords are almost always represented and tenants almost always are not. And so we try to settle, but if we can't, we're going to go to trial. And that then results in a judgment. If the tenant doesn't leave within the 10-day time period or whatever the judgment sets at the time for a tenant to move out, the landlord can can request what's called a writ of eviction. And that's when the sheriff comes to let people know, oh, you have, usually it's about 24 hours that people get, but there's no requirement that the landlord has to let the tenant know that the sheriff is coming.
So Kelly, really helpful, and I think you get a sense of kind of what the lay of the land normally is. What's the big difference that's happening now with the eviction diversion programs that's different from the norm?
Sure. So we are trying to keep as many cases out of court as we can. The courts are absolutely overburdened. Obviously there is COVID, and so we don't want attorneys and tenants in courtrooms as much as possible. So they are taking place via Zoom so that we can be in as many places as one. And then through the program, there's two tracks to eviction diversion. So on one side is the rental assistance and the other is legal representation. And so if a tenant is under the 100% of the area median income, they qualify for both the rental assistance and the legal services.
So Kelly, one thing I keep hearing is if there's rental assistance, if there's all these funds to help pay the back rent of tenants who have been unable to pay because of COVID, it seems like a great deal for landlords because they get their back rent paid. Why do we need lawyers in this process?
Well, to make sure that the landlords are following the law. And so that may mean that they, procedural defenses. So did the landlord file the complaints as they should? Did they properly serve? Was notice given? And so without lawyers, there may be default judgments that are entered because a tenant doesn't know what their rights are and they don't go to court. The other things that we can do are we make jury demands. So tenants have a right to a jury if they want one. But most of our time in this program, and actually even when it's not COVID times, is spent negotiating with landlord attorneys. And so our goal is always to try to not have a tenant have a judgment on their record, because we know once a tenant has a judgment on their record, it's very hard to get into new housing and very hard to get into subsidized housing as well. And so what we try to do is negotiate with landlords to enter what's called a conditional dismissal. And so a conditional dismissal will lay out a timeline either for when a tenant needs to move or lay out a timeline of when rental payments are due and what that is going to look like. And if the tenant complies with the terms in the conditional dismissal, that eviction is not on their record. It's an automatic dismissal. Landlords still have their rights though too. And so if a tenant does not comply with the terms in the conditional dismissal, they still have a right to request a writ from the court.
Great, thanks, Kelly.
Yep.
I know one of the courts that we've all been working with closely at Lakeshore is the 36th District Court in Detroit. So I'd like to turn to Chief Judge McConico to talk about the Detroit court in particular. And to back up just a little bit, Detroit had big eviction conversions long before the pandemic. And so can you talk, Judge, about what the lay of the land was before we got into March and this crisis?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say Kelly did a phenomenal job of explaining what happens in my courthouse. I was sitting here like, yeah, that's exactly the process. When I became chief in January, one of the biggest concerns that I had was the eviction rate that we have in the city of Detroit. I went to a couple of seminars. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court here actually had a seminar and talked about the that the fact that we in Detroit evict people at a rate that's higher than similar cities, Cleveland, Newark, New Jersey, Baltimore, the Bronx, areas that are impoverished areas, same literacy rates, same poverty rates, but why are we evicting so many? And one of the things that came to my mind was that we don't have representation for our tenants. And so I reached out to you guys with one of my big first meetings with the Detroit Bar Association. And one of the things that we talked about was making sure we had representation for our tenants. We have approximately 31,000 eviction cases that are filed each year, and the rate of eviction is around a third. So far this year, before the pandemic, the rate was actually a little higher. It was around 37%. The cases were ending with writs of eviction. And, we have to do better than that. And I think that the pandemic has caused us, we were actually doing this ahead of time because I was trying to figure this out. We've got to do better, but this has sped the process up. The state is providing resources. The city is providing resources, but we have to have more lawyers in our court. We have to have more access. And when there is a lawyer on both sides, the cases of eviction will go down. Landlords will get payment, and tenants will know their rights. And in criminal cases, the criminal system would break down if there were only prosecutors. You have to have lawyers on both sides, and that's what we're moving towards. And it will make justice flow better in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan.
Thanks, Judge. I want to talk about the eviction moratorium. Your court issued an eviction moratorium before the governor issued the statewide moratorium. Why did you feel that was necessary in the city of Detroit?
Well, because this was foremost on my mind before the pandemic, that we have this crisis in the city of Detroit, and I framed this as a crisis. And when we have a shelter-in-place order, how can you evict someone when the governor is saying you need to stay in place? I take care of my mother, who's 86 years old, and I was having to take food and leave it outside and make sure she's taking her medicine, talking through windows. And if I was doing that, the thought of someone her age being set out or being evicted, said, we can't have this, not right now. And we cannot, people are dying. In the city of Detroit, we were hit harder than the rest of the state early. And so I felt a responsibility to the citizens for their public safety and health, that we could not have people being set out, and children, elderly people being homeless in a time where we want everyone to stay in place.
Thanks. And then the governor's moratorium ended on July 15th, and the 36th district extended that moratorium. Why wasn't July 15th long enough in the city of Detroit?
Because we needed more time to have our resources set up, more time to have hotlines and email and websites for our citizens to know help is here, help is coming, call this number. Talk to these attorneys so that we're set up so when you get your 7-day notice, this is how you enter into the diversion program. We want you talking to lawyers before you get to court, not meeting someone in the hallway, or I'm putting you into a Zoom breakout room and you're meeting for the first time. As Kellie stated, we want cases to be diverted from coming to court. We want people to have resolution before. This also allowed us to meet with Wayne County's mediation. We're gonna have mediation for you guys. We're trying to not have these judgments, not have evictions, not have judgments on people's records. So the extra time allowed us to get all the resources ready so that it's time to go on Monday.
And Judge, when Kellie mentioned that most of these hearings are starting remotely, can you talk about when the evictions start happening, what that will look like from a tenant's point of view? Will they be coming to court, or will they be all virtual?
It will be virtual. So there are writs that were actually signed that were not executed before the original moratorium. Those, and I wanted to put people at ease. Court officers are not showing up, throwing you out on August 17th because the moratorium is listed. The landlords have to fill out the form to have the new allegations, see if the issue has been cured, and if the landlord does not refile, those cases are being dismissed. And so if the case is still a valid case, a hearing will be set. Those hearings will be set. The tenant will go before a judge. Hopefully they'll have some representation there at that point. see if it can be worked out, see if they can go into the diversion program, but they're not going to be immediate setouts in the city of Detroit when the moratorium is lifted on the 15th.
Thanks. And I want to talk a little bit about what you said at the beginning, Judge McConico. You mentioned that even before the pandemic, that you had been meeting to talk about getting lawyers for tenants and kind of evening the playing field. And you've been doing a lot where you have been bringing groups together that are the homelessness prevention agencies and legal aid offices. And I think it's really been a model, frankly, for other courts. So can you talk about how the court has done that, how you've led those efforts in trying to bring those groups together to meet this crisis?
Yeah, the one thing I was surprised, there was actually pushback from the plaintiffs' bar. There were pushback from even judges that they thought this is not the role of a court. And it is exactly the role of a court. People need to talk. There needs to be a playing field that's level on all sides. You can't be tilted in favor of the landlord or the tenant. And I was a little bit shocked that the actual trying to have discussion, trying to have dialogue, it's a new norm. People are not used to it. They're used to cases are filed, and it's a very quick system, as Kellie was saying. But we're not going to have that anymore. We're not going to be known as an eviction factory in the city of Detroit. There will be evictions, but we're going to try to make those as few and far between. We want to make sure landlords are able to continue to be in business, pay taxes, support the revenues for the city of Detroit, state of Michigan. But we also want to have people having shelter, having homes, being able to send their kids to school. And I'm going to do everything to push people together to talk. We may not agree. We may not settle anything, but at least we're going to talk. And that's part of what I do as the chief at 36th District Court.
And so I'd like to ask Kellie Rose and Kellie Maki Foster to talk about that a little bit as well. That why is it important to have the courts and the rental assistance agencies and legal aid programs all working closely together in these programs? Why is that so critical? Kellie Rose, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, it's definitely critical for having all those agencies working in a well-coordinated plan, especially with the way the process is now, with essentially having a 7-day adjournment from that pretrial to the next. That's really not that much time. So we need to make sure everybody's working in concert together so that we can quickly meet with the tenant and the landlord, get that conditional dismissal executed, and be ready to go. And we know that, by working quickly, this is going to be more appealing to the landlords. They're going to be more willing to work with the program when they know everything's working together well, and they see that this system is working.
Kellie Maki Foster, anything you want to add on that collaboration aspect?
Yep, sure. So these are unusual times. And so we need all hands on deck to really make this work. And so there's different organizations and government entities who really are used to doing part of the process, but they really weren't working as closely together as is really going to be necessary right now, and hopefully going in the future too. We're building these systems, but hopefully they continue even in 2021 and beyond. And so working closely with the courts, they provide dockets to us so that we can run conflict checks to see if we can negotiate beforehand. We're working really closely with the HARAs to transfer cases where rental assistance is needed, and trying to do that without bouncing tenants around from organization to organization, because people get frustrated and a little bit hopeless when that happens. They, try to find help in one place and they tell them to call a bunch of different numbers. So that's really difficult. And so those systems that are being built are going to just make our communities stronger.
I think I've heard Chief Justice McCormick talk about the things that we are learning in this process that none of us wanted to have to learn, but we're all certainly learning about that, how closely we do need to collaborate and figure out the right solutions to help people. And we don't have any choice at this point. We really do need to just get it together and make it work. Chief Judge McConico, any last thoughts on that collaborate effort? I know you've been leading it in the city of Detroit.
Absolutely. You know, we can make and come up with solutions if we're all working together. The goal is for everyone to have shelter, to have housing, and we want our landlords to be able to operate their business, and it will work effectively if we're like a team. And you know, you're not trying to benefit anyone more than the other, but we all have to be at the table to find a solution right now, because what we were doing in 2019, 2018, and 2017 was not working.
Absolutely. And so before we wrap up the show, Kellie, Rose, can you just remind folks how to access the eviction diversion program if they are faced with eviction?
Sure. So if tenants are getting behind on their rent, we really encourage them to go to michigan.gov/EDP to find the service area or the service agencies in their local area. And that's really where they should start. Pick up the phone, give them a call, tell them that they're behind on their rent. Even potentially if it's before the notice to quit or demand for possession, start talking. You know, understand what the process is going to look like, so that if they do get that notice from their landlord, they're ready to go.
Great, thank you. So, Chief Judge McConico, Kellie Rose, Kellie Maki Foster, I'd like to thank each of you for sharing your time and your expertise with us here today. I know you're all very busy working to get these programs up and running, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I think this has been a critical discussion. I think people have learned a great deal about the services that are available to help tenants catch up on their rent and stay in their homes during this time. So thanks for joining us on Legally Speaking.